This is Bharat FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत.
ये है भारत FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत.
Namaskar, good evening, good morning to all the viewers of Bharat FM. I welcome you to another episode of the Bharat FM news show. Today we are going to analyze, it's going to be our continuing coverage on the Russia-Ukraine border issue. We have a very, very special guest today. We are going to be talking with a military expert, a newspaper journalist, a columnist, and a very, very well-informed, very knowledgeable expert on military affairs. And so without any ado, let me go ahead and welcome Mandeep Singh Bajwa ji to this studio today, and let's begin our conversation and analysis of the Ukraine issue. Mr. Bajwa, welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be on your show, and look forward to scintillating time discussing this, grave world crisis.
Yes, yes. What an unfortunate situation the entire world is in right now. Tell me, sir, what do you think? Are we at the brink of the Third World War? What do you think about that?
Well, there are certain parallels with the way the First World War broke out. I won't deny that, but not just yet. I think the world will sort of teeter on the brink of a world war, but will stop just short of that. But Russia seems determined to achieve its objectives and get a modicum of security on its borders, and the West, or should I say the Western allies, the Western Europe, Central Europe, even countries in Eastern Europe who are now part of NATO and EU, and their allies and friendly nations around the world. They also seem determined, to keep the Russian bear caged by all means. So, and then behind all this is the military-industrial complex, because they're the ones who actually stand to gain the most. Expenditure of ammunition, new weapons, development of new weapon systems, and selling them, the huge profits. I mean, there's such a huge markup in weapon sales that they're the ones who are always laughing all the way to the bank. And First World War, Second World War, all the conflicts that we've seen since 1945, it's ultimately the weapons manufacturers who've profited.
True, absolutely. I agree with you. Talk to us, Mr. Bajwa, a little bit about the economic impact. Talk to us about from the perspective of Russia and the heavy sanctions that are continuing to be placed against it. But then also talk to us a little bit about the global economic impact, because right now the entire world is being impacted by what's going on. So talk to us about both those perspectives, please.
Globally, you'll find that oil prices are bound to go up. I mean, Russia is one of the major producers of oil and gas. In fact, the Russians only have two things to sell: oil, gas, and arms. I mean, they have no, industrial base to speak of in that matter. I mean, during the Cold War, they produced large number of tractors. In fact, you find that the Indian Green Revolution was propelled to a large extent by Russian tractors. I mean, those are part of folklore here, say in Punjab. DT14, DD28, and Bilaris, and their harvester combines. So the thing, and they produced very good trucks and all. But you find that after the end of the Cold War and the breakup of the Soviet Union, they mm, uh, they've not been able to sell uh, any of their products,
True.
any of the heavy engineering products, because
Mm-hmm.
they're just not competitive. And
Mm-hmm.
I think so. Russia, thing, and then you find even right now, this mustard oil has the prices of mustard oil have gone up. Cooking medium, they've gone up because they come from Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine is a country with huge agricultural base. I mean,
True.
that you find those huge wheat fields of Ukraine. You
Mm-hmm.
know, the collective farms which the Soviets set up, and that's how they developed all that those huge agriculture machinery.
Mm-hmm.
To sort of cultivate those farmlands and to harvest those crops.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the thing, and you find the prices of everything else are going to go up consequently, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Russia will feel the pinch because they import a lot of things, and as I said, they export nothing beyond weapons and oil and gas. I mean, Western Europe is heavily dependent on oil and gas from them. So
Correct. I'm glad you mentioned Western Europe. Yeah, tell me a
uh,
little bit about so what happens once Western Europe starts feeling the pinch of the cutoff pipelines. So what happens then?
I think they feel that Russia will have no choice but to sell to them at on their terms. So that's another sort of objective of these sanctions, to
True.
bring down prices
True.
of Russian oil and gas,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's a very delicately poised situation,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, Russians are showing a lot of determination. I mean,
True.
of course, the Western media, with its huge power, is really building up the Ukrainians, and with good
Mm-hmm.
reason. Ukrainians are,
Correct.
they are fighting it out.
Correct.
And their Western media, with its power over the English language press and television and social media, are
Mm-hmm.
really going hammer and tongs at the Russians, which they would, of course, naturally. It's, I mean,
True.
they're also the West are fighting a proxy war against
Yeah.
Russia, and
Yeah. Yeah. Every side, I think, has its story, obviously. Um,
yes. But what the underlying reason is, the Russians have always had a great fear and a great
mhm.
insecurity regarding the West, and with good
Mhm.
reason. I mean,
True.
Napoleon invaded them in 1812,
True.
which
Mhm.
showing that traditional resilience.
Mhm.
They managed to defeat him. I mean, that is the beginning
Mhm.
of the end for Napoleon, his first
Mhm.
defeat. And
True.
then, in the space of 25 years, the Germans invaded this Russia. I mean,
Mhm.
the Soviet Union suffered 20 million dead in the
Mhm.
Second World War, and
Mhm.
of course, they were able to get a lot of help from the Western Allies, and ultimately
Mhm.
defeated the Germans. And
Mhm.
uh, as a measure of security, and of course, naturally, their own desire to expand, they took over
Mhm.
most of the countries of Eastern Europe. I
Right.
mean, including
True.
East Germany, the Baltic states, and
True.
the Czechoslovakia,
Mhm.
Romania, Hungary. They all became
Mhm.
satellites,
Mhm.
and now we find them on the other side of the fence, because now they're fearful of
Mhm.
of Russia. So
True.
they had
True.
that, and 1990, when the Soviet Union collapsed, that time NATO had
Mhm.
14 members. Now they've
Right.
got 28, and
Correct.
there are a couple more like Ukraine who are clamoring to join.
Uh-huh.
And
Correct.
the NATO's borders have moved eastwards ever
Mhm.
since 1990. So,
True.
and there's no buffer left. Now you
True.
find that, and if mm, uh, Ukraine joins NATO,
Mhm.
you find that there is no buffer between Russia and NATO.
True.
The NATO will be, sharing a border with Russia, So their natural insecurity kicks in, and
True.
they were bound to do this. And you find that they have never held back on military action. I mean, Hungary 1956, Czechoslovakia 1968, and outright annexation, invasion, and outright annexation of Afghanistan in 79, which they had on.
Correct.
I mean, they only withdrew in 1989, where
True.
again there the West played a big part. I mean, the West bankrolled the Afghan Mujahideen and supplied them with weapons, and
True.
there were a lot of American and British special forces personnel who were fighting there along with the Afghan freedom fighters. And
True.
you find that they'll probably do the same now. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some of them that they're already, but uh, that would be more in the realm of the second phase, which would be the insurgency. I mean, given the huge disparity in combat capabilities between Ukraine and Russia, we can take it that the Russians will ultimately, maybe it may take them a little longer, but they will ultimately overrun Ukraine. And then the insurgency phase will start, where then, of course, the West will be again supplying them with weapons, supplies, ammunition, finances, training, and even deploying their own special forces personnel. So let's see. But at the
True.
moment, the Russian invasion timetable has been severely set back. But then, in warfare, first rule of warfare is that no plan, no operational plan survives first contact with the enemy.
True.
So, the Russian plan for a swift lightning thrust, a blitzkrieg to capture Kiev and Kharkiv and
Uh-huh.
other important, iconic cities has
Uh-huh.
been thwarted. But and that's why you find there's this 40-kilometer long, convoy on the
Convoy.
highway outside the Kiev, and they're trying to break in, and it's not
Correct.
happening at the moment. But
Correct. It
ultimately,
sounds like Belarus is now helping them with supplies
Belarus,
and
yes,
yeah.
you find that Belarus is, staunch ally of the Russians,
Yeah.
and would, they're also they're dependent on them for economic aid, and they
True.
also don't want to go the Ukraine way.
True.
I mean,
True.
Russia, everybody on Russia's peripheries is in fear that the
Yeah.
Russians might move against them. So,
Yeah. They're the big neighborhood
so
bully.
they've got just two options: either to join NATO for
True.
their own security, or to join the Russians. I think Belarus has chosen the Russians.
True,
So
true.
that's
You mentioned a little bit ago. You mentioned about how eventually Ukraine is going to be overrun by the Russian army, and I agree with you on that. But did you really expect the Ukrainian army to hold off for right now it's day 8? Honestly, I'm very surprised that they've held off this long. What are your opinions and thoughts on that, on the Ukrainian army being able to stave off the Russian
I
army
think
for this long?
there are a couple of reasons. One is that they received large numbers of anti-tank missiles from the
True,
Americans and the British,
true,
which they used extensively to
true.
because the to knock out Russian armored vehicles and stave off their advance. And then, so of course, surprisingly better performance by the Ukrainian armed forces. The Russians do seem to enjoy air superiority. That's why I find that that 40-50 kilometer long convoy is
Correct.
still intact. That means
True.
that the Ukrainians have hardly any planes left to take advantage of this long traffic jam. And
True.
thing. And then I think the Russian logistics, which has always been their weak point, once again proved to be their Achilles heel, and find that a lot of their armored columns are running out of fuel, and therefore grinding to a halt. And
True.
there are reports that Russian soldiers are going without food, which
Uh,
food has always been, in the Russian army, food is always has the lowest priority. Fuel and ammunition have higher priority,
right.
and they
Right.
virtually, I mean, they virtually depend on foraging for food
Right.
in territories
Mm-hmm.
which they capture. That's why people are always fearful of, having these Russians in your country. So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a brutal sort of military system,
It
and
is.
so that's
It
why
is.
the Russian advance has been slower. Otherwise,
Mhm.
their timetable was about say about 100 hours to capture Kiev,
Exactly.
but
Correct.
that's not happened. It's been a week
Mhm.
now,
Mhm.
um, and
Mhm.
I don't see NATO sending in troops and saying they will help them by other means.
Right.
And then try and use this in a second Afghanistan, because
Mhm.
Afghanistan the it became a sore spot for the Russians, and
Correct.
ultimately found the end of the Afghan war. The Soviet
Mhm.
Union collapsed because they
Mhm.
couldn't sustain the economic
Correct.
cost, not to
Correct.
speak of the military and the
Mhm.
social costs. And
Mhm.
so they'll use Ukraine to bleed the Russians and
Mhm.
keep them in check.
Mhm. And
Similarly,
we are going to.
like the Pakistanis have tried to use the Kashmir insurgency to
True.
bleed India and keep in check any military ambitions which India might entertain,
Uh-huh.
according to the Pakistanis.
Yeah, yeah, that is a great analogy. Actually, I really like that. We will get to a little bit of the complete economic devastation that war causes to both the aggressor as well as the invaded. But I want to ask you. You mentioned a little bit before that. The convoy is being able to stay intact because of the superior might of the Russian Air Force.
Mhm.
Do you feel I've read, quite a few opinion articles and news items saying that Russia has a very mighty air force. So if it was really up to them, they could have completely annihilated the country in a matter of hours, if not days. So are you getting the feeling that they are holding back on using the full might of the Russian Air Force?
No, they've used the Air Force to a large extent, but then they can't do the kind of thing like which the British and the Americans did with Nazi Germany in World
Mm,
War II, that is bomb civilians and all, because that doesn't then the entire your world opinion goes against you. So they've been attacking military targets, and they have I mean they have destroyed
yeah.
the larger part of the Ukrainian Air Force, and otherwise retarded the thing. But the point is that modern methods of camouflage, of digging in, of individual soldiers holding out and all. So your air power is most effective against larger targets,
Correct. Yes.
against vehicles, against large fortifications, against bridges, against towns, against power stations, against airports and things and all. So, soldiers dug in on the ground and all, are probably fare better, get a fare better. They have better chance of survival. So that's how the Ukrainians are holding out, and they've. And then, as I said, the Russians themselves, their logistics are not up to the mark, and
True.
that's why they're not been able to move forward. Otherwise, their air force is as efficient or as inefficient as ever. That's what I'm saying.
True, true. Let me ask you for a little bit about China. Let's talk about China for a second. What are you feeling, China's role should be right now? And, right now, the way it's going is, China is a friend, but still hasn't completely declared their friendship with Russians. They're kind of on the fence a little bit. What is China's role in all of this, in this entire situation? Talk to us a little bit about that, please.
China can never be a true friend to anybody. They're users. Ultimately, their aim is to dominate the world themselves, starting with Asia. So they will ally with the Russians. In fact, there are some people do feel that a new power bloc is coming up, consisting of Russia, China, Pakistan, and Iran, which may see some thing. I mean, there some developments like the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, being
Correct.
present in Moscow on the day that the Russians attacked Ukraine.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
ordinarily that would be a diplomatic faux pas, but apparently he's very pleased with it, and so the rest of his country. So let's see. I mean, the Pakistanis are, then now they feel that the US doesn't have much use for them now that they've withdrawn from Afghanistan. So they'd
Right.
like to, their friendship with China continues. I mean,
Right.
it's lasted about over 60 years, but
True.
they would like to cozy up to Russia if they get, some sort of economic benefits or whatever. And let's
True.
see in their struggle with India if they can get
True.
Russia on their side. I mean, we
True.
shouldn't forget that India was aided greatly by Russia in the 71 war, particularly
True.
in dealing with the threatened US intervention in the shape of the
Exactly.
Seventh Fleet. I mean,
Right.
the Russian submarine flotilla was also operating in the Bay of Bengal, which
Exactly.
did put a check on the American intentions.
Exactly. Exactly. But the new power block that you're talking about, that doesn't bode very well for India, though, right?
Well, the thing is that our diplomacy hasn't been all that good, and then we opened up a front inside our own country against our own people, and now again we are making enemy. I mean, we are presenting our own students in a poor light. I mean, the students whom we evacuated, we brought back from Ukraine, and I think we're presenting them in a bad light that um, they're studying there because they couldn't get admission here or whatever. I mean, this is
Right.
ridiculous, and
Right. That is very, yeah, that's very
uh,
unfortunate.
yeah. So I
We,
mean, this is not. I think. I mean, students, farmers, minorities, anybody who stands up for themselves becomes the enemy. That's wrong. I mean, with this, as I said, if this new power block comes into place, we'll be squeezed from both sides. I mean,
true.
Pakistan and China, in any case, are working together, and
Correct. Yeah.
Pakistan is heavily
Russia
committed
being,
because of the CPEC and the economic gains that they hope to gain from that. And
correct.
we must build ourselves, we must strengthen ourselves, and this is just not the way to do it. And
True.
we should take a longer term view uh, um, and then ultimately we have to stand up to China. We can't
True.
allow them to do the kind of things that they've been doing in Eastern Ladakh in the
Right.
last two
True.
years.
True.
So
True. And they've been causing a lot of, heartache in the South China Sea as well. So, that.
yes, yes. I mean, this string of pearls that they're weaving around India, Myanmar,
Yeah.
Sri Lanka, Pakistan,
Mm-hmm.
Afghanistan. And
Right. Correct.
Chinese have got now great stakes in Afghanistan. I mean, Nepal, and they're closing up to Bhutan also. I mean,
Wow.
our
Mhm.
our
Yeah.
people have the powers that be in India have mind to rub off Bhutan the wrong way also.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So we
Yeah,
have to
that's way too close to home,
change this thing.
though.
We have to make the things, and we can't think in terms of our ancient civilization conquering everybody, or what I mean
True.
that Maoian concept of Akhand Bharat and all. Whatever
Yeah,
we got, let's try and keep that safe and secure. We can't
exactly.
think in terms of expansion. I mean, that is
Right.
ridiculous.
It is a new world order, and we need to abide by that almost.
Yeah, it's a very worrying prospect, and we are getting flack from the West. I mean, the West is extremely annoyed with us for
Right.
abstaining on crucial votes in the Security Council and in the UN General Assembly, and even otherwise, not openly condemning Russian aggression or whatever. I
Correct.
mean, we have to walk a very difficult tightrope. I mean, it's not an
Correct.
easy situation for us. But
Correct.
then we also risk alienating the West, which
Right. Do
is
you see any long-term fallout from that decision by alienating the West in this way? Do you see any long-term implications for India?
well. The thing is that South Asia is very important for the West, and if they lose Pakistan as a client state, then that means that they have nobody left here to work with. So they'll have to come back to work with India, and we must try and maintain good relations with the West also. We can't afford to alienate them. I mean, look at the number of look at huge diaspora in North America, huge
Correct.
diaspora in United Kingdom, huge diaspora in the rest of Europe. I mean, Italy,
Correct.
Spain, Germany.
Yeah.
Uh, the number of Indians who are living and working there, and then again in Middle East, the huge number of Indians in the Gulf. So
Correct.
we have to walk a very difficult tightrope. We've got to maintain good relations with so many countries, but so many power blocks. So that is a very order. And worried about colonial-based politics. And the confrontational politics will not work. And we need
True.
to, also take account of, broad-based public opinion in within our country, and not
True.
divide our academia or our intellectuals or people who can give us good advice or all into camps. We can choose, take good advice from everybody, work with
Yeah.
everybody, and
True.
make it a
True.
national thing, and um,
True.
have a national governance plan in effect, and that way try and get the best deal for yourselves. And at the end of it, we got to make ourselves strong economically and militarily, and
True.
from within also. We can't afford uh, uh, these kind of confrontations with important sections of our society. So
True. We have to keep the peace there as
we
well.
have to uh, that, and then we mustn't forget that the Chinese have been trying to test us. They have tested us, and
True.
and they've also increased our costs because we had to station many more troops in East Ladakh than earlier, and
Exactly.
the line of actual control with China is rapidly being converted into the line of control in Kashmir,
True.
with the deployment, with the year round deployment of troops, whereas earlier, you know, we those less stringent, less dense deployment. You had
True.
your border management forces and other things,
Yeah.
but now
Yeah.
you got to had to deploy regular troops because uh,
True.
the Chinese just simply walk in and take over certain areas, and
Right.
they're infringing on our territory everywhere. I mean, in Uttarakhand, UP, Sikkim, Arunachal Pradesh,
Correct.
um, I mean, Himachal,
Correct.
other things. So these are all worrying
To
prospects.
be correct. And
Our defense budget has come down to its lowest level since 1962, which
wow.
is a very, very worrying
Mhm.
thing. And
True. True.
what are we hoping
True.
to do? So,
True. Yeah. Mr. Bajwa, you were talking about China and its, intentions and plans. A lot of news reports have come out recently saying that this world distraction will be a really good opportunity for China to stake their claim on Taiwan and annex Taiwan and make it theirs. So, do you think that that is a likely scenario to happen at this point from China?
well, the analysts feel that way, that China will take advantage of situation with the
Mhm.
West attention diverted towards Russia, Ukraine, and the uh, other developing crisis in Eastern Europe uh,
Mhm.
to take over Taiwan. They've been wanting to take over Taiwan for last over 70 years, and
Correct.
they could just do it, and
Mhm.
they would have uh, the support of the rest of the emerging new power
Mhm.
bloc.
Mhm.
And Chinese forces are very strong, and they could, of course, I think Taiwan would put up a good fight. I mean,
Sure.
see, they're
Yeah.
they're also determined to
Mhm.
keep their independence. But
Mhm. Mhm.
that would be another flashpoint, and
Mhm.
the world could very well again teeter on the brink of a world war, and certainly
True. True.
great amount of instability in the Pacific region, which
Mhm.
will again cause anxieties in the rest of South Asia, that
Mhm.
people will be scared that China
True.
could they could be next. I mean,
True.
India will again face problems because the
Mhm.
Chinese are not going to stop.
True, true,
So,
exactly.
uh,
Mr. Bajwa, right now, even as we speak, the Quad countries are, coming together to have conversations. India, Australia, Japan. What are you expecting? Do you have any thoughts about what you feel might be the outcome of the conversations between the Quad countries?
well, Quad basically was reaction to Chinese expansionism and what I would say Chinese neo-imperialism in the
Mm-hmm.
Indo-Pacific region.
Correct.
The Americans also were affected because
Mm-hmm.
they border on that, their west coast borders on
Mm-hmm.
that. Plus,
Mm-hmm.
they've got huge economic interests in the
Mm-hmm.
region. This is a one of the very big markets,
Mm-hmm.
and then their sea lanes of communication run through here. Their oil,
Mm-hmm.
the routes for their oil supply
Mhm.
run through this
Mhm.
region. So
Mhm.
naturally they'll be worried, and Australia is the same because it's a large, huge country with a small
Mhm.
population, and
Mhm.
you know, some would say it's ripe for the plucking, and
Mhm.
and with huge resources. So,
True.
and Japan has had a very long and bitter history with China, and
Mhm.
particularly the Chinese have very bitter memories of
True.
the Japanese
Japanese.
occupation of the country and the war
Correct.
which
Correct.
they waged with them in the 30s and 40s. So
Correct.
I mean, that's absolute enmity with no quarter given or asked. So
Mhm.
the Quad came together, in the spirit of developing mutual security,
Mhm.
and of course the Quad deliberations have been put under strain by
Mhm.
recent developments in
Mhm.
Ukraine, and
Mhm.
India's refusal to uh, condemn Russian aggression.
Mhm.
So they'll have to work something out.
Right.
They can't let the Quad wither away.
Mhm.
There have to
True.
be
True.
sense of duality,
Uh-huh.
a, a dual policy that let India uh, have its own policy on Eastern Europe, Russia and
Mhm.
Ukraine. But
Mhm.
in the Indo-Pacific, where mutual interests are
Mhm.
affected, and
Mhm.
where there's a severe threat from
Yeah.
the Chinese hegemon,
Uh-huh.
uh, then we
It's
work
a good
together
time to come
and
together for
work
that.
to if not confront, at least
Mhm.
put up a united face
Mhm.
against the Chinese, so that
True. True.
the Chinese don't just walk in everywhere. Because
Mhm.
there's so many small countries in Southeast Asia
Mhm.
which the Chinese could easily dominate. So
Mhm.
that has to be looked into.
Mhm.
And there,
Correct.
all these countries, Vietnam,
Mhm.
Thailand, and
Mhm.
even say Bhutan and others and all, are all
Mhm.
looking up to the Quad to provide them leadership and
Mhm.
to ultimately confront the Chinese dragon.
Mhm.
So,
Correct.
but I have another view on this, that China itself is not internally very stable,
Mm.
because
How do you say that?
there are a lot of fissures, a lot of dynamics beneath the surface.
Mhm. Mhm.
Their security system is so strong that they're
Mhm.
able to keep all this, under the surface and
Mhm.
hidden. But
Mm.
I think
Mhm.
there's a strong pro-democracy movement in China,
Mhm.
and a lot of anguish over the
Mhm.
denial of human rights to the
Mhm.
Chinese.
Mhm.
And those could easily spill over, maybe not immediately, but in a decade or so,
Mhm.
they could spill over and cause the Chinese ruling party a lot of
Mhm.
anguish,
Yeah,
a lot of
Hong
anguish.
Kong has given them, quite a
Yes,
run for their
Hong
money
Kong
for
is the
sure.
starting thing, because they've, in any case, they've seen better life.
Mm-hmm.
They've witnessed democracy, and
True.
they've seen what it is to live in an open society.
Uh-huh. True.
So
True.
that's something which
Yeah.
we can exploit also. But
Mm-hmm. True.
unfortunately, India doesn't believe in that. We're more keen
Correct.
to sort of pander to the Chinese and sort of
That's
keep them
unfortunate.
quiet and whatever.
Mm-hmm. Right. Sir, let's go back a little bit to, we were talking a little bit about the students and not even just the students, all of the Indian nationals that are currently in Ukraine and stuck in Ukraine. Previously, on one of our shows, we had spoken with the father of one of the students who's currently stuck there, and is not hasn't yet been able to get out. He's on his way. He's on the move, but he hasn't yet gotten out and gotten home safely. What is your opinion on how the Indian government has handled this extraction of the Indian nationals? Has this been a missed opportunity, or do you think they've done a good job and done it swiftly enough? Tell us a little bit about that.
I think at the outset, I'll say that Indian students are there not because they couldn't pass the examinations here in India, or they're
Correct.
academically underachievers, but
Correct.
because of economic reasons. I mean, the cost of education there in Ukraine is it's much cheaper than in India, which is
Correct. And regardless, my feeling is that regardless of the reason why they were there, the point is that there are Indian nationals
yeah,
and they
well,
are, in
that's
an
true.
unsafe
You
situation.
have to, that's is a larger issue, that we have a great callousness towards human
Hmm.
life here in India. We
True.
don't bother very much about
Hmm.
human lives. I mean, the way the migrant labor were treated in the beginning of the lockdown
True.
during the pandemic, and
Hmm.
other things, and all those things, and it's something which has existed always. Maybe because of huge population, or maybe because of our own ancient traditions, or
Hmm.
whatever.
Hmm.
We don't have the kind of value for human life which you have in the West, which is
Hmm.
something which we must emulate.
Hmm.
The extent which they go
Hmm.
save human life and
Hmm.
look after people, the health
Hmm.
system, all those things, the welfare state, cradle to grave systems and others. So
Mhm.
uh,
So
we
you're
in
feeling
the
they could have done
beginning,
better.
I think there was a situation where we were ignoring the coming storm, and
Mm.
now we've gone into overdrive to project a sort of a
Mhm.
PR kind of this thing. I mean, I saw some visuals of one of our ministers getting into an argument with the mayor of a Romanian city.
Correct.
You know, I mean, that's ridiculous for
That's not the image we need to project at this
that's
point.
not the thing. And the Romanian official was rather bitter and accusatory.
Uh-huh.
Of course, our politician held his ground, but why
Mhm.
get into such a row? So
Correct.
we have to go beyond PR, and
Mhm.
we have to do things.
And
And
do the
it's
right
been done
thing
in
by
the
our
past. It's been
citizens.
done in the past, and
Yeah.
we have to build a humane society
Mhm.
where we care for our people. We have
Correct.
to. It has to be a caring society, caring, loving society, in
Correct.
tune with what used to be our ancient traditions
Mhm.
and things. We can't.
Mhm.
This callousness for human life must be combated, and
Mhm.
everything shouldn't be reduced to scoring political brownie points or PR junkets or whatever and all. And
Mhm.
we
Mhm.
have to, and then we don't lack resources.
Yeah.
We could
We
easily have
don't.
employed all the resources for other
Mhm.
things. And
Mhm.
also, our diplomatic missions must be geared up for the
Mhm.
India of the 21st century.
Mhm.
That is, looking after our nationals there,
Correct.
projecting our economic interests, and
Mhm.
furthering the uh, uh, the interests of our Indian companies
True.
in foreign this thing. You find that diplomats from the West and other
Mhm.
countries, I mean, even
Mhm.
say some of the Asian tigers like
Mhm.
South Korea, or
Mhm.
others, Malaysia and all,
Mhm.
their diplomatic missions
Mhm.
work closely with
Mhm.
their companies. I mean, Samsung or Daewoo or even the Japanese
Mhm.
companies and all.
True.
They get the full help from their embassies. I think so.
Mhm.
We have that mindset has to change. The
Mhm.
training and the thing and lead has to be given by politicians, and
Mhm. True.
they must work closely with with their diplomats to
Mhm.
bring about this transformation and change in mindset.
Mhm.
So these are
Mhm.
some of the issues which have been worrying me for some time, and
Yeah. And they are
but
coming kind of to the fore in this
and then
emergency situation.
ultimately, everything is handed over to the armed forces. I mean,
Mhm.
in Chandigarh, a week ago, we had
Mhm.
this, strike by the powermen, and
Mhm.
most of the city went without electricity, and ultimately the
Mhm.
army was called out and restored power. So we
Mhm.
can't have this situation persisting here again.
Mhm.
The Air Force is being used to airlift
Mhm.
our students and citizens from
Mhm.
Ukraine.
Mhm.
So the civilian authority must be able to hold its own,
Mhm.
uh, and otherwise you can't give everything, hand everything over to the armed forces. Of course, naturally they're available and all, but they should be used only if there's nothing else available. When you have all your paraphernalia in existence, why not use that?
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's
Mhm.
the
That
thing.
is an interesting point you're making. That's very interesting. Let's talk a little bit, Mr. Bajwa. I want to talk a little bit about the sanctions. Let's go a little bit deeper into the sanctions that have been placed against Russia and what the long term impact is going to be. Because, it's easy to, make, light sanctions, heavy sanctions, and keep putting more and more sanctions and kind of choking their economy. I understand that, and choking their pipeline for any kind of money that's being funneled into the war. But right now we know that they have pretty solid reserves. We know that they have a friend in China. So how does placing sanctions and continuing to place more and more sanctions, how does that help the immediate situation and a drive towards peace? How does that help?
I'm quite cynical about the whole business of sanctions. I mean, they hardly ever works. They place sanctions against South Africa. Yeah, South Africa flourished, saying economically and even militarily. They placed sanctions against the former Rhodesia, but they were able to do what they called sanction busting all the time. All their weapons and aircraft and oil and stuff still made its way. See.
Correct.
And other the things countries, I mean, okay, countries which are supposed to be in aiding terrorism and all, it's never worked against them. And Russia is too large to be sanctioned effectively.
Uh-huh.
And then I said they have that that ace gas and oil,
Correct. Correct.
and Western Europe is dependent on them. So
Uh-huh.
they'll use that as a counter weapon to
Uh-huh.
combat any sanctions.
Mm-hmm.
In the long run, sanctions will not work against them. And then
Mm-hmm.
they've got still got a lot of the rest of the world um, uh, to work with economically,
Mm-hmm.
and then their weapons, weapons find a ready market everywhere. So
Correct.
I don't see in the long run sanctions working. Of course, sanctions have gone beyond economics. I mean, you find that there are a lot of sanctions being imposed among Russians in sports.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Correct. Correct.
FIFA and others, and the
Correct.
tennis
Mm-hmm.
federation and others, and all have
Correct.
imposed sanctions also.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, well, you keep them out of the socio-cultural thing. It only, I mean, even during the Cold War, there were those cultural and sporting links which helped in, maintaining some sort of
Mm-hmm.
facade of Mahomi, which prevented World War or
Correct.
nuclear,
Mm-hmm.
nuclear winter coming in. So let's see.
Yeah.
But I think
But
you're
in this case, it seems like they are, the NATO and the Western powers are completely bent upon, isolating and completely choking up Russia, so to speak.
oh, well, because frankly, they've got to conjure up some enemy or the other, and in this case, Russia has, Russians are on the march. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they swallowed up Crimea,
Yeah.
and they went into Georgia,
Correct.
and they're throwing their weight around
Mm-hmm.
in the
Mm-hmm.
Istans. Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And then we find that situation has come to such a pass that neutral countries like Finland, Sweden, and
Mm-hmm.
Switzerland have also joined the
Switzerland,
sanctions.
I was amazed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think
Yeah.
The Swiss have certainly decided, that now it's time to
Mm-hmm.
join the rest of the world, and
Correct.
because
Correct.
I mean, now there are so many other avenues for
Mm-hmm.
banking available to the world that
Mm-hmm.
deposits in Swiss banks are coming down. So they
Correct.
decided that they'll have to uh, deal with the rest of the world, and
Correct.
particularly with the Western allies. I mean,
Right.
if you can call them as such, and
Right.
you know keep up their domination.
Yeah.
At the moment, they do dominate, although their share is lessening,
Uh-huh.
and maintain their share of the economic clout which they
Uh-huh.
wielded in the past. So
True. True.
that's and then I think Sweden, Finland are sending weapons and equipment to Ukraine,
Uh-huh. True. True.
which is something I mean, astounding.
Yeah.
Of course, Finland has
Another
got bad blood
country.
with Russia also. I mean,
True.
the Russians invaded them in 1939, but
Mm.
then
Mhm.
there the Finns held out, They
True.
defeated the Russians.
The Russians. Another
Mhm.
country, Mr. Bajwa, that I was very surprised got into the phrase, Germany, actually. Germany, after, since World War II, has kind of, taken a back seat on the global stage militarily and
Mhm.
hasn't, contributed and participated in any military action. And, even they sent, weapons and, stuff to Ukraine, which was very surprising and a very bold move in my mind.
Well, because Germany is probably the only country on which with the potential to take on Russia because of large population, economic clout, technological base, the predominance of their heavy engineering industry, and their propensity to be able to manufacture weapons if needed. So, and then of course their military background. Of course,
Correct.
they've tried a lot, tried very hard to distance themselves from that. But
Correct.
that German reputation for efficiency survives. So Western Europe will certainly like Germany to take a leading role in confronting Russia.
Correct.
Because
Correct.
that's led to a number of memes and all that, the Germans are saying, let me get this right. You want us to build a large army? You want us to march into Poland? You want us to fight the Russians? So let's get it
Right.
written down before there's some misunderstanding or whatever. I mean, harkening
Right.
back to the
To
late
World War
30s,
II.
late
Right.
30s and World War Two. So,
Very interesting. Let me, and I know we are running out of time here, sir. I have a couple of more questions that I want to ask you before I let you go today. So, one of the questions being, Russia has used, cluster munitions. They've used vacuum bombs. These are against the Geneva Convention. Do you see any, letting up on that? Do you see, do you see any kind of fallout from, going against the Geneva Convention on that?
the Russians are ruthless. I mean, the
Mm,
Afghan war, they just didn't bother. They went so far as to, poison wells in Afghan villages to prevent the Mujahideen from, using, from access to water, prevent their access to water, and also terrorize the population in the rural areas. And they used there some evidence that they used poison gas also in Afghanistan. So for them to use such thing is par for the course, and it's part of their military doctrine to use terror to subdue the population of a country which they've invaded. So we can expect them to use such munitions.
Do you
And
think Putin is going to face, censure or some kind of a punishment as a war criminal?
well, he'll certainly face censure, but then he comes. I mean, he and say the Russians and other people who support them come out with counters. They say, "You look, what is the West done?
No,
Um,
true.
uh,
True.
uh, you invaded Iraq without any reason. You
Uh-huh.
invaded Afghanistan.
Uh-huh.
Right now, your technicians, your pilots, other than all, are helping the Saudis bomb Yemen. Mm.
True. True.
And there's so many other instances that they quote. I mean, current conflicts where the West has had a leading role uh, in you know committing war crimes. So, what does one? How does one answer that? So it's a, it's a cynical sort of a world, and you just can't get away from it. And there are no Simon Pures, and
True.
there are
True.
there are no shining, knight in shining armor to
Right.
claim, moral victory or whatever.
True, true.
I guess that's all now.
Speaking of knight in shining armor, I want to ask you, as our closing question, if you can lay out the whole thing for me. What do you think is the end game right now? Ukraine is being bombed, shelled. Day 8, they're holding off, but their cities are falling. Russia is not letting up. They are continuing with their firepower. What in your opinion, your hospitals are being targeted, schools are being targeted, so it's a really horrible humanitarian situation for the Ukrainians. What do you think is the end game to this to this current crisis?
So I don't see NATO intervening militarily.
Mm-hmm.
So you can take it that the Russians will be in occupation of Ukraine,
Mm-hmm.
and their attempt would be to make it a satellite state and
Mm-hmm.
install a Moscow-friendly regime there,
Mm-hmm.
and create a safe, secure environment around themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And the West will probably try and foment an insurgency against
Mm-hmm.
the Russians.
Mm-hmm.
So you can take it that the conflict will continue.
Mm-hmm. What
Um,
happens to Zelensky? He just survived an assassination attempt. They thwarted that attempt. So what happens to him?
he could probably. I mean, I can only use my limited crystal gazing skills by
Yeah.
saying that he'll probably might lead a government in exile or something like that. I don't think he'll
Mm-hmm.
stay on. He'll probably lead a government in exile or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And the Russians will try and brazen it out. They've done that in the past, and
Mm-hmm.
the West will try and use this as another Vietnam, like the
Mm-hmm.
way the Chinese and the Russians use Vietnam to bleed America, not just physically, but to cause mm, create chinks
Uh-huh.
in America's socio cultural armor.
True.
The anti-war movement
True.
in the USA in the 60s and
Mm-hmm.
70s, and
Mm-hmm.
weaken they tried to weaken America through that. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and the catalyst, of course, was Vietnam. So the
Mm-hmm.
West will try and
Yeah.
do the same, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore, contain, if not weaken, at least contain Russia, so that
True.
Russia doesn't infringe upon their areas of dominance or influence.
Uh-huh. Right now, I would have to say that world support overwhelmingly is in favor of Ukraine. It seems like, a lot of, common man support sort of seems to be with Ukraine. The mood is very, very much, towards peace and towards, Ukraine and what they are suffering.
Well, definitely, I mean, it's a question of David versus Goliath. The
Mm-hmm. True.
small Ukraine, and standing up with
Mm-hmm.
their sports stars and their models and their beauty queens and others standing up. They started raising an international foreign legion where
Uh-huh.
a number of people from other countries have already joined up,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of thing. So they would naturally get public sympathy, and if there are Russian atrocities,
Mm-hmm.
that will add to hatred for the Russians and
Mm-hmm.
more sympathy for the Ukrainians. So
Mm-hmm.
sympathy for Ukrainians will remain. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
just the very fact that a small country taken over by the Russians will
True.
gain them plenty of sympathy. And if the
True.
Russians commit atrocities, which they will, I mean, they're
Uh-huh.
bound to. Their system is such,
Yeah.
outlook is such, and
Uh-huh.
mm, so it will, create more unhappiness, more ill
Mm-hmm.
will, and more
Mm-hmm.
hatred. So it's
Yeah.
a dismal
True.
scenario.
True, true. Thank you very much, Mr. Bajwa. I really appreciate your
Yeah.
time today, and I
Yeah.
really appreciate the way you helped us unpack, some of the side things that have been happening. Everybody knows about, the war and what's going on, but you gave us a really good insight into the background and why some of the things are happening. So I'm sure our viewers today would have gotten a lot of benefit and a lot of new knowledge from that. So I really thank you for that.
It
Really
was a great
appreciate it.
pleasure, and look forward to chatting with you again sometime.
Great. That would be fantastic. You're always welcome back into Bharat
Thank
Media
yeah,
Studios.
thank you.
Have a great evening.
Thank
And
you so
to
much.
all our viewers, have a great
Thank you.
evening. Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
This is Bharat FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत.
ये है भारत FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा